Using a 19mm socket, let's go ahead and remove our lug nuts. If your vehicle is equipped with a hubcap like ours, go ahead and grab that hubcap or center cap, pop that off, grab the wheel, pull it off, and set it aside. Now, I went ahead and we put our ignition key in the on position. That way there, we can go ahead and manually turn the wheel without it locking. I'm gonna go ahead and remove these bolts on the back side. This is 12mm. We're now going to go ahead and remove our brake caliper. Using your pry tool, go ahead and separate the caliper from the caliper bracket. You want to support that. You don't want to have tension on this flex line here. I'm going to go ahead and pop our brake pads off. Using a 17mm socket in your ratchet, I'm going to go ahead and loosen and remove the caliper bracket bolts. You remove your caliper bracket and set that aside. Now, if your brake rotor has these set screws here, there might be one down below as well. You want to go ahead and use a Phillips head screwdriver. Loosen this. If your vehicle does not have this, it is not critical to the operation of the vehicle. Is simply placed there to hold the rotor to the hub on assembly. Good, remove that. Grab your rotor, put that aside. Use the punch to open up the little lock tabs right here, how it's dimpled in. Use a 32mm socket to remove the spindle or axle nut. Once you remove the spindle nut, you want to check and make sure that the spindle or axle is loose. You can push on it. Ours is nice and free. If yours is stuck, you want to go ahead and use a punch, put it in the middle of the spindle or axle right here, and you want to hit that so that it'll loosen that up. Using a 12mm socket, I'm going to go ahead and remove the bolt holding the flex line to the strut. I'm going to use a 10mm socket to remove the ABS line to the strut. I'm going to go ahead and use a 10mm socket right here to go ahead and remove this bolt holding the ABS sensor to the knuckle. I'm going to go ahead and grab our ABS sensor. I'm going to work that out, rocking it back and forth and gently pulling outward. Using a 19mm wrench and a 19mm socket, let's go ahead and remove the nut off of the strut bolt here. On this lower ball joint, there is a cotter pin right here. We're going to go ahead and use a pair of pliers and remove that cotter pin. Using an 18mm socket, let's go ahead and remove this lower ball joint nut. Now what we're going to do is go ahead and work these bolts out. Then what we're going to do is try and separate the knuckle from the strut. At the same time, we're going to try and work the CV axle out of the knuckle, as well as pull the knuckle ball joint out of the lower control arm. I'm going to go ahead and use a pry bar. Once that's free, work that CV axle out from the back side. Go ahead and separate that knuckle. I'm going to go ahead and remove this lock ring. We're just going to go ahead and use our little chisel here and work our way around, popping this ring off. I'm going to go ahead and press our ball joint out of the knuckle. Going to install our new snap ring. All right, just want to make sure that snap ring is locked in all the way. It looks pretty even and level. Now we went ahead and we cleaned off the CV axle shaft and we put a light coating of grease on the splines. Now we're going to go ahead and insert our lower ball joint into the control arm. We're going to put our CV axle in through the hub. Let's go ahead and work this in. Once everything pops together, I'm going to work the upper part of the knuckle up and into the strut, and then we'll get our bolts installed. Just going to install the lower nut on the ball joint. Snug that down. We're going to go ahead and torque that down to 45 foot-pounds. Now I want to pay attention to locating the hole in the ball joint shaft here so that our castle notch lines up with it. It appears that we're off a little bit. So what we're going to do is tighten up that nut a little bit more until that hole lines up. We have the hole exposed right here. Let's now go ahead and take our cotter pin, slide that through, bend over the bottom half, and then we're simply going to trim the excess off. Now take your CV axle, we'll just bend that over, work that into the wheel hub. Work that knuckle up, and you can work that CV axle through the hub. Once you see the axle start to come through, we can now work the knuckle into the strut and get this reattached. Now we're going to use our dead blow hammer to try and work the knuckle in, hit the control arm up, just so we can get our bolt started. And it might take some persuasion and movement by hands as well. Once we have this one lined up, we can now go ahead and line up the lower bolt, and we'll put both of those in. Get that bottom bolt lined up. Go ahead and get our nuts installed. Thread those on as far as you can. Then we'll go ahead and snug those down. Just go ahead and snug these down. Go ahead and install our axle nut. Let's go ahead and snug that down. Go ahead and torque these down to 80 foot-pounds. Install our ABS wire bracket. Put this little tab in the hole there. Go ahead and get the bolt started. Once we get that started, we're going to go ahead and install our ABS sensor right here. Line this up inside. Go ahead and work the sensor into position. And then go ahead and get the bolt started. Snug these down. We're going to install a couple lug nuts here. I'm going to go ahead and use a pry bar on the lug nuts, and we're going to go ahead and torque down the axle nut to 134 foot-pounds. I'm going to go ahead and remove our lug nuts. Set those aside. Now what we're going to do is dimple the spindle nut into the CV axle here. I'm going to go ahead and line up our brake rotor and slide that into place. I'm going to go ahead and line up our brake caliper bracket. And we're going to get our bolts started. Let's go ahead and snug those down. Let's go ahead and install our outboard brake pad. And we'll repeat for the inside. We'll install our inboard brake pad with the squeak tab at the bottom. I'm going to grab our brake caliper. Bring our hose up and over. Just get our bolts installed. Once we snug those down by hand, we'll snug those down with our ratchet. Now as we're trying to tighten this here, our slider is rotating, so we're just going to grab that. Let's install our brake flex line bolt. Snug down this bolt. Once it's snug, just give it a little extra more. There you go. Let's torque down our caliper bracket bolts to 79 foot-pounds. Torque down our caliper bolts to 25 foot-pounds. If you have your brake rotor screw, you can go ahead and install that. If you don't, that's totally fine. And just snug that down. Go ahead and install the wheel. Now, if your vehicle is equipped with the hubcap that locks on with the lug nuts, you want to go ahead and locate the notch in the hubcap for your valve stem. Line that up. And we'll get those lug nuts started. I'm going to go ahead and snug down the lug nuts. Let's go ahead and torque our wheel down to 80 foot-pounds.